George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. And we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Nina Moore. She's the chair of the Political Science Department at Colgate University, where she happens to be a professor as well. Of course, she's a professor because she's the chair of the Political Science Department. Her book is called The Political Roots of Racial Tracking in American Criminal Justice, of course, many other articles, and she's appears in the media. She's currently one of the rotating panelists on the Ivory Tower Half Hour on WCNY, but you should know that her television debut came with George Kilpatrick back in the day, where we had this little show, Access with George Kilpatrick. I think that's the name of it. Yeah, that was the name of it. And Nina was our star panelist back in the day. So it's so good to catch up with you, Nina. Can I call you that? Because, we know each other like that. But she is Dr. Nina Moore. Just let me get that straight. But Nina, let's talk about your general thoughts about the elections. First of all, the roller coaster of last week. And I can tell you what happened to me. I was in New York City when Pennsylvania was called for Biden, and it was a party, believe me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me on the show. And here comes a little bit of shade, finally.
Love it.
Right. But since we go back a ways, I want to feel free to say that to you. And can I just offer a slight corrective?
Yes.
Never thought of your Access show as a little thing. I thought it was a big thing. It was, offering a very important perspective. And thankfully, though, and true to your character and your juice in upstate New York, you are continuing to offer a platform for important things. To your question, and if I recall correctly, it is sort of my general reaction to the election. And it is that, first I'll say, and sort of was thinking about the macro analysis of this, the election demonstrates, unequivocally that we're a very divided country, increasingly polarized, but that we have this new phenomenon that is Donald Trump that has changed at least the right side of what is polarization, meaning it used to be Democrats versus Republicans, increasingly so. Now it's Democrats versus what is the cult of Trump on the Republican side. When it comes to the issues that are near and dear to my heart, which is the interests of Black folk, the role and the voice of Black folk, I do think that Blacks sent a resounding message that we are here and that we will utilize our vote. I recall getting up on the very first day of early voting in New York to go to the Southwest Community Center to vote, and was struck by the fact that the line was already around the block and the place had not yet opened. I remember thinking, now are we running on, forgive me if I offend any of your voters, you know what's coming, right? I remember thinking, are we running on CP time? And the woman who was behind me said, no, we are here early. So clearly Blacks had very much of an interest, but at the same time, I'm not sure that we have a completely clear read on what the expectations of voters were and are, and hopefully we'll get into that.
Yeah, that's very interesting you say that, because I was there on that first day as well. And I don't know why I had to do it on that first day and stand in the line, which I didn't have to. I guess I could have waited a little bit later on. But it was very important for me to do it that first day. And I think for many of us, Nina, it was about making sure that we voted and that the vote counted. And we didn't want to be, I'm probably reading your mind, you didn't want to have to deal with election day and what that may or may not have been. So you wanted to get it done.
Yeah, I wanted to get it done. And there was this sense that I'm sure other voters shared that were both Black as well as non-Black voters, that finally, here's our chance to send a message. Here is our chance to do our part. And as I talked to the people who were standing in line, I heard a number of, sort of anthems as to what it was about for them. That is to say, that showing up on the very first day. And some of the older people said what I've often said, and that is, there are people who died for to have the right to vote. The other most common refrain was that there's a lot at stake, and we've got a crazy guy in the White House, and we have to do something. And then, of course, the third, and not necessarily in that order, is that there was this slew of high profile incidents in which unarmed Blacks were killed by the police. That in and of itself was enough to buoy Blacks to the polls. But I think what really sealed the deal is that we had a president who wanted to turn the tables, a president who, as President-elect Biden said, took it up on himself to pour gasoline on a racial fire. And I think that stoked the ire of Black voters who said, okay, we're going to show you who we are.
And yet some of us, though in still small, overwhelmingly we voted for Biden, but still some of us increased our support for the president in this cycle. And even amongst Black women, a slight increase. Again, minimal compared to the overwhelming people that voted for Biden Harris. Anything to make of that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, George, and I'll try to do this really quickly, is to pan the lens outward a bit and take note of the fact that we have learned first and foremost that we cannot talk about the Latino vote as a monolithic bloc. So I think we all always had sort of a sense that Cubans could be separated out because of Catholicism, Cuba, and all of that. But what struck me as fitting along the lines of what you just mentioned is that even in Texas, along the border towns where you've seen some of the most outrageous, heavy-handed control of the border, Trump managed to get a larger percent of Mexican votes than many had expected. Now, recall, he called Mexicans out and said that they're murderers, they're rapists, they're increasing crime, and there's been sort of this dog whistling, not even so much dog whistling consistently, where Mexicans are concerned. And then finally, to what you mentioned, yes, there was, so far the estimates are, there was a doubling of Black support. Now that doubling goes from roughly 4% of what he had garnered in 2016 to 8%. And don't quote me on those numbers, George, right. But it's just the gist of what you said. There is a doubling, and one has to wonder, to what extent is that really about those voters either being part of the social conservatism that we know is pretty significant within the Black community because of religious reasons, or B, to what extent is it really about the economy, right, and being able to put gas in the tank and food on the table?
Yeah, it's and that's what I'm having trouble with here, because you have someone who is as reckless as can be, right? 70 million or more people actually pulled the lever for him too, no matter what, right? And now even at the time of this conversation, we're continuing to have these baseless challenges to the electorate. That being said, a lot of credit is being given to Black women for pushing this, for what they did during this election. Shout out to the sisters for coming through. But Clyburn, Representative Jim Clyburn, do we give him a little bit of love as well for really turning that tide in South Carolina and making it okay for us? Because it's interesting, right? What Clyburn was saying, Joe's a decent man, and as we are celebrating Kamala Harris being on the ticket, his first choice was Joe Biden because he wanted to win. Talk to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we should give a little bit of credit to Congressman Clyburn. I think we have to get a whole lot of credit to Clyburn. Biden recognized that, right? He, was dejected after Iowa, after New Hampshire. Many people had written him off, but he knew that if he could just hold on, joy comes in the morning. In this case, joy came in South Carolina, thanks to Jim Clyburn. And perhaps later we can return to some of what Clyburn is cautioning with respect to progressives. But let me switch to your thoughts about Black women and say, to keep it all the way 100, Black women turned out to vote. Black women were canvassing for him. But let's be real about Stacey Abrams delivered.
Talk to me.
Okay. Stacey Abrams First of all, she has made Georgia bluish, Georgia,
Of
right?
all, right. No one
Of
could see
all,
that coming.
yeah, who saw that coming? But she kept her nose to the grind. She just, kept hammering away and came close to winning a statewide election that I do actually believe was stolen from her, because how in the heck do you have a Secretary of State,
Right.
run an election that he's a part of? But the other thing that she did is by running, also captured the attention of Black voters who have positions but didn't really see much of their own personal stake in elections. In other words, that there are a number of voters in the South that didn't see themselves as having a dog in the fight, and she was able to mobilize them to make clear to them, here is what is at stake. And even now, the woman is just, she's gone all the way in with respect to these two runoffs, to the point that she's got Andrew Yang uprooting and moving
And that's
to
something.
Georgia. And money. So, I'm not going to whine about the fact that I really wanted her to be chosen as vice president. Look, I'll take Kamala. Kamala is a badass. She, attorney general, San Francisco prosecutor, and she could probably talk us into doing pretty much anything that she wants. But
Right.
hope was that Stacey Abrams would be chosen precisely because she has found a way to make inroads in places where she's not expected, where no one would expect Blacks to have made inroads.
Talking to Dr. Nina Moore, professor, chair of political science at Colgate University, you alluded to the cautioning that Jim Clyburn is giving to the audience, because while record numbers of us voted for Joe Biden, we didn't turn the table in the down ballot races. And in the extent we've got a runoff in Georgia, which is we got to turn to Stacey. Stacey, we need you one more time, right? And it's all focused on that, and which is what people are thinking. That's why the GOP is being sort of not really. They're trying to wait until after that before they really say, okay, yeah, you got this. I'm making light of it. I know that's not really the issue, because there's some state certifications and recounts and things that have to go on. But in an interview on CNN, I recall, he said that when we talked about defunding the police in that way, for example, that he believes hurt Democrats in some of these areas. I'm sure you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the yellow brick road route to where you're leading me.
Go ahead.
As you said, that at the end of the day, 72 million Americans voted for Trump and 77 million for Biden. So we could split the baby, because there are many votes coming in, and say half of the electorate, half of our fellow citizens voted for Trump. We would be inclined to attribute their votes to endorsing his racism, his homophobia, his sexism.
That's what I would do.
Classism, his ignorance,
yes,
his all the other stuff. And on the surface, that that's an easy thing to do. However, if you consider the fact that at least 9% of the folks who voted for Trump previously voted for President Obama, right? And
right.
Consider also the fact that we are assuming that our issues, our concern about racism, sexism, about inclusivity, about diversity, are the same priorities for the Trump voters, and they are not. And I would even go so far as to say that they're not prioritizing economy either, because many of them, the white non-college educated males, did not necessarily come out on top. What I think we should consider is, as we question how in the hell could they vote for a Trump, they're probably questioning, how in the hell could we vote for a candidate who, in their view, supports the murder of unborn children?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's really about looking at it from both perspectives. And I am not getting ready to say, there's good people on both sides, because I'm not dealing with the white supremacy part. But the fact that white Christian evangelicals, admittedly, some of whom are just straight up racist, but there is that connection. There's that intersectionality with their version of Jesus, right? So we've been talking about the classic Jesus versus the Republican Jesus versus the white evangelical Jesus. They've got their version. And their version of Jesus says, okay, here are the two things that we care most about: that unborn children are not murdered with the approval of the state, and then secondly, they've got issues with LGBTQ rights. So they're looking at us and thinking, how in the world could you see Donald or see Joe Biden as somehow a way to heal the country?
Mm. So, right, it's okay, and we're off to see the wizard. So then, so then, Nina, then a lot. So black folks have, and this is what happened with Obama. We're now going to a Biden-Harris presidency with some expectations, right? You know, Simone Sanders is up there on the. She's high up as an advisor in the campaign, and you know, Joe is moderate, straight up, right? And in fact, some of my more progressive friends say, you know, Joe's problematic and Kamala Harris is problematic. So in reality, what are some specific things you would want to see addressed from a Biden-Harris presidency for the black community, and how will we get them? Because that's my concern, that one of the concerns, if you will, a critique that some offer of the Obama presidency, which was great, but the one critique was, well, you really couldn't even say the word black without feeling like you had to chastise us, or you know what I mean? Like you came to us differently, and we expected a little bit more. Maybe that's the way I'll say it. It's not that we didn't get a lot from him, but there was certainly a lot more expectation than what people perceive he delivered.
Yeah. Oh, this could be another show
Okay,
about
truth, right?
of us making assumptions about skin color, telling us something about both what you believe and what you can expect it to do, or at least even try to do, because those are two separate things. I do believe that Obama went to DC expecting to change the world, why he adopted the motto change. But then he confronted Washington, sort of like Mr. Smith goes to Washington. This was Mr. Obama goes to Washington. But to your question of what my expectations would be relative to Black voters, it would be these issues, the ones that have been spilling out into the streets. The fact that we have a criminal justice system where you go into a prison, and as Richard Pryor said, you don't see justice, you see just us. And the ripple effect that has on the children of those imprisoned, on the communities of those who are imprisoned, on even the health safety, the fact that the AIDS rate is greater within prisons among Blacks, then that carries out into the community. The fact that you have all these other collateral consequences, not being able to get a loan, not being able to get public housing, and so forth. And I would say the biggest thing is that it affects power because of disenfranchisement of felons. So the criminal justice reform has to be first and foremost, I think, for Blacks, because Blacks are disproportionately affected by it. I think the second thing is an easier thing, and that is to reverse the Trump executive order that eliminated racial sensitivity training. On the surface of things, that doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's not going to have a material effect, but the symbolism of it, I think, is significant. And so far, it's going to lead other corporations to continue to see diversity as an important thing. Here's my worry. Here is my worry with Biden. And by the way, I did have an opportunity to do a sit-down stage interview with Biden one-on-one just a couple of years ago. And leading up to this, I was thinking, I wasn't so crazy about him. And in my book, I criticized him because of his stance in 1994. But then after having met him and then realized that he backtracked from that, I thought, great. But here's my problem. In his very first week of being president-elect, I didn't see Black issues among those lists of executive orders that he's going to tackle first.
So already we're getting, like Lucy and Linus, getting ready to have the ball taken away from us again.
Already, because what did we see? We saw the DACA executive order rescinded. We saw the Muslim ban rescinded. We saw the return to the World Health Organization, and we saw a return to the Paris climate change a piece of policy. we didn't see, here's what we're going to do with criminal justice. We didn't see, here's what we're going to do relative to Black folk. And the reason I have an issue with that is because he admits very candidly, unequivocally, that if it were not for Black people and Black women, I wouldn't be here. Well, God damn it, if you know that, the very first thing you ought to be doing is saying to Black people, okay, here's a bone, something, if it's in your first week, because to me, that's your priorities. But loving Biden the way I have come to love him, I will expect that he'll get around to that, because executive orders are not going to be the mode for criminal justice reform. So, but he's going to have to do something big in his first 100 days.
You talk, and you mentioned your book, The Political Roots of Racial Tracking in the American Criminal Justice System, which is about racial profiling and the criminalization of Black folk, and how that's, I didn't read your book yet, but I will. But that's I know, right? But that's part and part. But that's also tied into public policy. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that it's tied into public policy because it goes well beyond the more provocative and quite frankly more disturbing aspects of criminal justice improprieties that we've seen. In other words, we've seen a lot about the police killings. We understand that there are racial disparities there. What we need to understand is the racial disparities in the way we enforce laws, criminal laws in this country, run across the board from start to finish, to why Blacks are stopped, and the vast majority are stopped for reasons that are not reported, to the fact that Blacks are disproportionately searched, and criminal evidence is least likely to be found. And you can cover it even down to what happens in prisons, that the kinds of rehabilitation programs offered to Blacks are nowhere on par with that offered to whites, to the prosecution, to the sentencing. It runs through and through. And so the policy dimension of this, George, is for us to shift away from a focus solely on police to looking at these other much deeper, longer term, much more wide reaching kinds of difficulties. And the second thing I'd say is we got to get real about this and recognize. And so here's where I'm going to lose some of your audience, and I'm okay with that because you'll still give me ice cream cone. Here is where we got to get clear about this. And okay, so I'm just going to jump in there. We got to be clear. Racism in the US has been with us since the founding of the country and before. Mass incarceration of Black people has been with us, not since the 1980s when Reagan came in office, but since the 1970s. We have witnessed this sort of disregard for Black life, this slighting of Black women for decades. Why in the hell did it suddenly become a problem now that Trump is in office? Right? Where were all of these liberals that are now crying racism more than they say good morning? Why weren't they raising the flag? And I'm not talking here about Black advocates. I'm really talking about the so-called white liberals. Why were they not upset about the sort of stuff that we've heard coming out of every policy corner before Trump? Right? And then secondly, why is it that what gets their goat has more to do with the sort of superficial symbolism of what he said and how he said it and the words he spoke, as opposed to the fact that segregation of schools is more entrenched in northeastern, not countries, but states than not, that the gap in income is greater in the Northeast than not, and housing opportunities, you go down the line, but their sense of racial injustice, to my mind, is way too bound up in Trump. And so my worry is, once Trump leaves office, will they still give a damn?
Talk to me. I love it. So before we got a lot to get to. So let me finish up. We won't have enough time to do all of it, but let me finish with this. So we got some work to do. How does Kamala Harris? How does she be relevant as, like, what kind of role do you expect from her as vice president? the fact that, and whatever you want to say about the symbolism of her being the first, which is important, the first woman of color, the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman, you know, the significance of that, but also what influence will she have in the White House, and can we count on her to tell the truth?
Yeah, I think we can count on her to tell the truth. And can I say this? I am not as struck by the fact that she has a lot of melanin in her skin. I'm not as struck by the fact that she identifies with Blacks and Indian, South Asian communities as much as she does. I am struck by the fact that here we have a Black woman who became the Attorney General of one of the largest states in the country before becoming the prosecutor, or after becoming prosecutor in San Francisco, and then going on to have the audacity to become one of the largest states' senators. So when I look at those facts, those standing on their own and apart from anything else, scream out that this woman knows her stuff. Given the nature of her prior occupations as a prosecutor, I expect that she's going to be focused on two things: the facts and the process. And so made clear to President-elect Biden, she wanted to be the last person in the room. I think she's probably going to be able to stay on message, to stay on course, to producing real policies that matter, probably even more than President-elect Biden, precisely because she's going to focus on the facts. And the woman can argue a case better than anybody I've seen.
Will the president concede anytime soon?
I do not think he will concede anytime soon. And in fact, I was just saying to a talk I gave right before the show, George, and I don't know that I'll say this again, because I noticed that lots of other pundits and politicians are tiptoeing around it. Look at what President Trump has chosen to focus on as he's quote unquote cleaning house. There are 15 departments within the United States government, and there are 15 secretaries of this, that, or the other in the cabinet. Of all of those different areas, he has chosen to focus on the Department of Defense, and in particular to remove Esper, who had previously declined Trump's push to use the Insurrection Act in order to quash protests. So I say all that to say, my gut, probably the projects and the conspiracy thinking person in me, is seeing this man sort of positioning himself to stay in office, to prepare for unrest and the protests that will undoubtedly come, because he didn't stop with Esper. He continued to remove 4 other top officials who are part of what he calls a deep state, but they are in fact professionals. And with this, when he could have fired Anthony Fauci, he could have gone after any other folks who've pushed back against him. But this man is squarely focused on the Department of Defense. And we already know it is not for foreign policy concerns. He doesn't even care about COVID. He doesn't care about anything right now but the election. And somehow he sees cleaning house at the Department of Defense as consistent with moving his election interests forward and filling those posts with loyalists who will do all of his bidding. That's
wow.
what I say.
You know what? That's some heavy stuff right there. And that is something to think about. Dr. Nina Moore is the chair of the political science department at Colgate University. Her book is called The Political Roots of Racial Tracking in American Criminal Justice. But as you can see and as you can hear, this sister has a whole lot to say. So now I'm going to shade you back. You coming back? You coming back?
Listen, you know my number and my email.
We good then. Nina, always a pleasure. Inspiration for the nation.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.